Let's see.
Okay, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our webinar presentation discussing developing and leading high-performance teams. If this is your first webinar with us, welcome, and I'd like to just quickly introduce myself. My name is Amanda Henty, and I'm the Alumni Professional Development Coordinator here at St. Louis University. I started my role in July of 2015, and since then I've been working on establishing and strengthening alumni professional development programming, and this webinar series is a part of that initiative. I know there's a lot of people from all over listening today, so welcome, and I know there are also some of you that are listening at your companies, and your whole team is listening. So feel free to, if you have questions team related along the way, feel free to chat those to me. The chat box will be open. And we'll be taking questions throughout the presentation, as well as at the end, we'll have a designated Q&A time. So our presentation today will be recorded and available for viewing early next week on our main SLU YouTube page. And I will also be sending out an email to you when that is available. If you have technical questions, if anything goes wrong during the presentation that you think is your computer, I've chatted to you all the technical support for GoToWebinar. That phone number, if you want to give them a call, they can usually get everything squared away pretty quickly. Okay, so now I would like to introduce Dr. Bill Klepper. He is our presenter today. He's an alum and also a member of the National Alumni Board here at St. Louis University, as well as a professor at Columbia University. So welcome, Dr. Klepper.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm hoping everyone can hear me clearly. I know you're looking at my face at this point if my deck is working, so let's get off of that for now. I'm going to take you back in time. As you probably heard Amanda say, that I'm an alumnus of SLU, as we like to say. I actually graduated in 1966 from undergrad. You can see went on, got a master's, and then came back and finished my PhD in 75. By the way, this was the team I was part of back in 69 to 71. Some of you might know some of these names. One that I'd like to highlight is to the left, Mary Bremer. And some of you know that she's, I guess you might say in many ways, an institution within an institution. And that would be me on her left, as you can see, going clockwise from her. But some other people, Jerry Brown, who actually ran the Student Center. I did the housing program. Here's the inside information, folks. This is the way you got free tuition for your doctoral coursework. In other words, you know, I always like to joke about the Jesuits. They used to pay us with spiritual bouquets. I actually say that was tuition on your graduate program and some other individuals. So this was a team that I worked on, probably similar to the team maybe that's listening in right now. They're diverse, right? Different points of view, different experiences. And I understand from Amanda that we might have some teams listening in. So here's an opportunity to kind of learn, which basically I wish I kind of had learned earlier on. So here's what I want to do in the webinar, and we're going to only be together for about an hour, is I want to give you some skill sets that I think will be very helpful in terms of your effectiveness, not just as a team leader, but even a team member. We can talk about some basic tools. I'm going to focus on a couple things. I'm going to talk about some things you probably know about. You've been in teams. That diversity, by the way, is a strength to teams, but it also, by the way, can be a hindrance to teams. And when I talk about diversity, what I mean is not just, you know, race or gender, you know, ethnicity, geography. I talk about expertise. But whenever you mix a diverse team, you've got to manage it well. Research shows, are you ready for this? Research shows that you'll have higher performance from a homogeneous team than you will a diverse team if you don't manage it well. So even though we embrace, and I do embrace, maximizing the potential of diverse teams, you do have to manage it well if you want to increase productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness. So keep that in mind as we talk about what we're going to today with regards to your team. So I like to say diversity is a strength that enriches us all, but if you don't manage it well, in many ways, you might be better just to stay with people just like you, because you all agree that you're, at least of common ground. Here's where I'd like to take you. Two areas, again, early research with regard to team roles and development. Team roles. A guy by the name of Belbin developed early on. This goes, by the way, his original research goes back to the 70s. Talks about observed behavior in groups and the styles that apply to these. And we can talk about that if you'd like, because I'm a firm believer, by the way, you don't start to separate yourself. Then in many ways, the way you behave in a team has a lot to do with your own behavioral style, the strengths of it and the challenges of it in relationship to other people. So we're going to talk about Belbin, and we're going to talk about you. And I'm also going to put this in the context of the work that was done originally by Tuckman with regards to your team's development, right? And so some of you probably remember this kind of, I guess you might say, chant of sorts, that our teams go through a forming stage. He called a storming stage. By the way, if you look at the graph on the right, I'll give you a larger one. That's when your actual performance goes down. And you say to yourself, why do we form this team in the first place? It's doing nothing but bad things for us. And eventually, if you can, you work through that to a norming stage and eventually became high performing. Again, this gets a little bit more complex when we're dealing with diversity. So you with me? Okay. And by the way, Amanda has agreed that she's going to watch the chat box because I can just keep on talking, right? But I don't want to do that. She's going to feed me and interrupt with any questions that might come in. So Belbin, team roles. Tuckman, team development. Okay, so forming, storming, norming, performing. You got it? So forming would be a stage, again, where you've just pulled some folks together to try and get something done. Now, do not confuse these things. A meeting is much different than a team meeting, all right? So if you think just gathering folks together in a room to listen to you is a team meeting, you're sadly mistaken. When you are forming as a team, there's a different dynamic operating there. And in many cases, you got to understand that your role as a leader of that team becomes in what I would consider to be more facilitative than anything with regard to your role. All right. And to get this diversity play. Now, once you're through that building stage of formation, you go to storming. That's where the ideas start to get generated. And we've all been in the rooms where ideas are coming out from all over the place. People are skeptical. Some people object, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of groups will stall out there because remember, it's a low performance stage. Norming is when you come out of that and come to some agreement about what it is you're going to do. And ultimately, if you're what we call a high performance group, we call it performing. Now, I've asked Amanda, just so I know who's out there, to take a poll. So you got it? Forming, you just pulled the group together. Storming, no, we've been working together, but we're not getting anywhere. Norming, we know what we want to do now, and we're starting to get it done. And then last is, we're pretty good shape, but we want to keep it going. Help us out here. So here comes a poll. Go ahead, Amanda. Find out where these people are at.
Okay, let's give everyone a couple of minutes to fill this out. In the meantime, we did get a question that came in. When you add new people to a performing team, does the team go back to the forming stage?
The answer is yes. Anytime you reconstitute a time, you've got to revisit your forming process. And I can get more into the details of that. But for example, one of the things I think is extremely important is that everybody know what everyone's strength is, not just with regards to expertise, but also with regard to style, right? And whenever you add new people, the chemistry changes. So don't assume that when a new person walks in the room that you can just pick it up where you left it. You've got to, in many ways, revisit the issue and tools to be applied to form again. Good question.
Okay, so I think most everyone has responded. So we had 31% forming, 20% storming, 32% norming, and 22% performing.
Oh, that's good. So we got 31% of you right? They're basically saying, okay, we're in the forming stage, Bill. We're willing to listen to anything you want to tell us because we're an open book at this point in time. There's 20% out of you. They're saying, hey, Bill, we've got a problem. We're stuck. Get us out of it. All right. And then we got another 32 that's saying, no, we're actually working on things together, and it's okay, but we'd like to kind of know how we can get even greater performance from that. And of course, for those 22% of you that say you're the perfect team, you're high performing, we'd like to hear from you to see if anything I say can help people come through those forming, storming, and norming stages. So, Amanda, that was very helpful. In many ways, what we got is a mix. We got a mix, all right? So, but what we know is it tends towards forming and norming, with about 20% in the storming and performing states. Okay, so let me take you into this a little bit more, because here's maybe some aha for you. For those 31% of you, 31% that are in the forming stage, I want to talk to you about Belbin's various team roles and see if you can understand which would be important. First of all, he groups his, I guess you might say, roles into three categories. People-oriented roles. In other words, look, this is just the staging, right? The staging for, I guess you might say, phase of getting your team together. And then he goes to, okay, if you've then kind of pulled your team together, you need to go into a thought-oriented roles. And if you get that together, then you can go into action. Okay, so just so you know, here's the labels. I'm going to get more into them. If you're forming your stage, so you're 31, you listen to me out there? Here it comes. Do you have a chairperson? And you might say, Bill, come on. Yeah, so now watch. Not only is it important that you have a chairperson, but you understand what the qualities of that chairperson might be. So let me just give you a little hint. For those people, and this is what I always warn team leaders on, when you come in, decide, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull this group together. I'm going to tell them, here's my problem, and I'm going to tell them to solve it, right? And if I don't like what they're doing, I'm going to solve it my own way. Now, that's not what we want from a chairperson. If you want to maximize, again, the strength of diversity in your group. Now, you might say, Bill, don't over exaggerate here. No. So really the ideal conductor, and for those of you, by the way, that ever played in an orchestra or watched a conductor work, a conductor is more of a guide. Yeah, more of a guide. Have you ever watched a conductor? They kind of reach out and then alert a certain section of the orchestra when to come in, right? And then they go to another section. They're a little bit ahead of where the group is played, right? But they're there as kind of a guide. So I always tell chairpersons, if you really want to get the most out of a team, you've got to become more of a facilitative leader, right? So you got to be a high process person as much as a high task. So sure, as the chairperson, you want to set the charter, identify the challenge, right? Convey what it is you want to fix or what it is you want to create. But once you've done that, then you move more into facilitative roles. And here becomes then the next role that's key. It's consensus builder. I'm a firm believer, by the way, if you don't believe in consensus decision making, you're not going to be effective in working with diverse teams. And I'll talk more about this at the end, but in many ways, what consensus decision making is has everybody had an opportunity to contribute? Are we collaborating, as a collective here to get the best ideas, right? To move into action? That's consensus building, and I'll give you the way you do that later on. And then, of course, ultimately, you want to look around the room and say to yourself, do we have the right people in the room, right? I think a big part of the forming stage is to ask yourself, do you have the right resource in the room? It doesn't have to always be in the room, but certainly you want to have access to it. So I always tell people a good resource seeking role is important at the forming stage. So people-oriented roles are extremely important at the forming stage. Now, has anybody asked any questions about this out there yet, Amanda?
I have a couple questions, yes.
Good. What do you got?
We have when a performing team adds a person that needs to catch up to the speed of the group, but is a fast
Right.
learner, who does this affect the most, the group or the perception of the individual?
Yeah, that's interesting. Of course, this one I'm going to say both. Um, First of all, any individual comes in new to a group goes through an orientation stage. It just does, right? Because for a number of things, what they're trying to do is to see, okay, what's going on here and what's my role? I think anybody comes into a group that's established has to go through that. The other side is always thinking, who is this person and what are they going to contribute to us? So I think, and here's what's interesting, in most cases, we don't talk about this. So chairpersons, if you're out there, listen to me. Whenever you invite a new person into a group, make as a process intervention a discussion of that very dynamic. Look, Bill has joined us here today. We thought Bill might be a good contributor, particularly in this area. Bill, tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you think you could help us with. You know what our problem is. That's good. Then the chairperson should ask everybody else in the room, anybody got any questions of Bill or thoughts or ways you think we can help him contribute? Right? So I ask Amanda, what do you think? Can you work with Bill? Well, maybe, right? So we go back and forth. Now, a lot of times we don't go through that team building activity when we have new people come in. So the answer is both are disoriented by a new member coming in, both the existing team and the new person coming in, but the leader can facilitate and lower the tension from that disorientation. What do you think? Be interested to see if they chat back here on that one. Okay. So I'm going to keep on a roll. Unless you got something else for me, Amanda. You got anything else?
I have one more.
Okay, good.
Do you want to take it now?
I'll take it whenever you want to give it.
Okay. It's how do you determine who the team leader is?
Oh, well, here's what I wish would happen. I wish that we wouldn't rely on titular leaders. In other words, people by title. I think that's a big mistake. Here's what I'd like for people to agree to is that you've got particular roles that are important that come into play at certain stages of the team's work. So now let's say we're at the forming stage. The group should determine who would be the best chairperson, right? Have an open discussion on that. Now, the person, by the way, who is the charter, I guess you might say, authority in the group, I think should start off the discussion. Say, look, you guys know what I'm bringing together. Here it is. There it goes. We've been challenged to address this problem, or I guess you might say create this new way of doing things. I'm happy to contribute, but at this point in time, I think since we've got a strong process capability in Amanda, why don't you take us down the road here and start our discussion? So my belief is not all people of title are the best chairpersons, but they should be in the room. They should contribute as they could. And in most cases, I always tell if the titular leaders are smart, they'll identify that person that's a strong conductor, consensus builder, right? And have a discussion with them before. So I wouldn't want to catch Amanda cold, but I'd say, Amanda, be ready because I'm going to yield the floor to you. And be real. Do you mind if you'd pick up leadership in this regard? Because what I'd like to do is sit back and listen to people because I know it's my problem. So there it is, Amanda. Okay, good. So I'll keep going. Okay, now a lot of you out there, by the way, this is only 20% of you, said that they're kind of in the what they call storming stage, or right? What I saw some kind of, a lot of people say this is the idea where brainstorming occurs in a group. We've all been there, right? Where idea generation begins to happen, right? Now, here's important for all of you in teams. There's going to be certain individuals, by virtue of your creative, right, spontaneous, expressive style, let me put it that way, are just going to be full of ideas. I mean, you're just going to be, in many ways, generating more than a lot of people can manage at any one point of time because it's just too much. You're overloading circuits. So Belbin and I kind of collaborated on this one. I'm joking. And I think you never want to put an idea brainstorming session together without strong checkers that can analyze options. In other words, let Bill kind of run off on his ideas for a while, but then you want to make sure that Bill has a strong partner in the room that says, Bill, slow down for a minute. Those last 2 or 3 ideas, I think, have the ability to give us some opportunity, but we need to check them out. So a lot of you, by the way, and these are typically the more analytical members of your group, right? The individuals that can do that kind of deep analysis, right? They usually are contrasting styles to your idea generators. So if you're in a storming stage, you do want to generate ideas, but where you can stall out is if you don't channel that in terms of good analysis to determine what options have the greatest probability for success. Now, 32% of you, by the way, said you were in what I call the norming stage. This was the largest percentage. This means you're ready for action. You're ready for action. And here, the one I'd like to emphasize more than anything else is the implementer. If your team is ready for action, everybody, if it's going to be a productive team, has got to have something to do, right? And the way you do this, by the way, in an action-oriented part, now this assumes, right, you've identified the problem, you've generated ideas or options of choice to solve the problem or create the new offering. Now the question is, let's get the rubber on the road. So implementers are extremely important here, people that are going to do something. And I always tell people, watch out, because this is not a time for what I would call free riders. A lot of people would say, well, I thought I've done my job. I gave you a good idea. No, no, no. Everyone on a team has to be able to work towards putting things into action or implementing the ideas. So I'll say that, and then I'll say one more thing, and then we'll pause and see what we get, Amanda. A lot of people say, well, we're high performing. 22% of you say we're high performing people. Well, here's my guess. If you're high performing, my guess is you're at a point then where you're changing the way things are being done around your organization, right? You're having an impact. If you're high performing, right, everybody's talking about you anyway, about the fact that you've improved things. I want you to understand that that's really a change role, because what you're starting to do now is begin to get through what I would call the normal way we do things to the new way, right? You've gone from what I call the current state to a more desired future state. That's a change role. And your leader needs to, in many ways, kind of, I guess you might say, champion your team efforts and try and further them in the organization. And oh, by the way you get credibility in that performing is to always have somebody there that keeps to make sure you have thorough and timely completion. That's your arbitrator. Okay, now that's a lot. Let me show you. Then here's the list you can look at. Your major contribution, your allowable weakness, all right? So you can kind of ruminate on that if you a little bit. I just let it sink in there a little bit. Think about yourself. Think about yourself. Think about your group. Think about the role you think you might be best at. All right. If you want to, look on the weaknesses side and think the one that might be important you not take on, that others of the group might take on instead of you. Okay. We getting any questions out there at all, Amanda, on this one? No?
So not yet, but I do have a follow-up question to the previous question that was about the person that needs to catch up.
Oh, good. Good.
Okay, so the follow-up is just a little bit more detail. The group
Good.
is a strategy consulting SWAT team where speed, ideas, solutions, and long hours are expected. This is different from the background of the new individual. The question remains, does the person have the duty to catch up quickly using whichever resources are available, or should the team take 5 and train the incoming consultant?
Yeah. Well, here's, by the way, I've done a lot of work with strategy teams. Want me to tell you how McKinsey works? Here we go. Let me just kind of help you on this. Any of these, what I call strategy teams, and I agree, by the way, in many cases, they're consultancies, right? So people are paying for you to, in many ways, do the hard thinking, and in many ways, I guess you might say, strategic planning for them. But I don't want to dwell on that. But the fact of the matter is, if you're bringing in a new resource, it's usually targeted for an area that you feel you don't have as much heft or as much depth, let's call it that, right? in that case, it would be possible, if you want to kind of keep your pace going, still do the process intervention, but do it in parallel with the work. Don't feel like you got to shut things down. All right. Now you might say, well, Bill, what did you just say? Well, okay, well, something like this. We've added Bill, in this case, I'll use myself. We've added Bill because of his particular expertise with regard to analyzing, let's say, the industry, right? Bill has deep knowledge in the industry in the area in which we're working, okay? And we've been kind of feeling like we needed more heft in this area, but we need to know more about what Bill has done. So here's what we're going to do. Bill, I'd like you to partner up, if you wouldn't mind, with Amanda. And Amanda's always been our great strength with regard to, let's call it, our customers in this area, in this zone. By the way, the typical, I digress here. The typical thing you're going to have to address if you're building a strategy is your customers, your competitors, right? You're going to have to evaluate your own business. How do you make money? How do you don't? You're going to have to evaluate your industry. You're going to evaluate the overall environment, okay? So Bill's coming in and he's going to bring in deep knowledge in the industry. But we all know that when a strategy works or doesn't work, the customer has to buy the service or the program or whatever. And Amanda's got her fingers on that pulse. What we'd like to do is, Amanda, would you mind kind of shadowing with Bill and kind of bring him up to speed of where we're at and how we're doing here in the group, right? So that's one thing you can do so you don't feel like you're having to stop everything in process. Have a little mentoring session going on the side. And a leader can do that or find someone that can complement. So if you know, by the way, an industry person's coming in and you want to match that up with where your customers are at, it'd be a good mix. Might be another mix altogether. But I teach a course on leading strategic growth. So I'd love to get into this conversation more if there's more questions, but how are we doing?
We do have a couple more if we want to take them right now. We have, can people play multiple roles?
Absolutely. In fact, that's the final exam question. The answer is all these roles you're capable of, but don't try to be all things to all people, all right? I quote the great philosopher Dirty Harry here. You remember from the movie Cool Hand Luke, right? And the famous line at the end was, a man's got to know his limitations, right? I feel that way when it comes to team roles. I think that we primarily, right, should go to the areas that we have strength in. And by the way, if you did the assessment, and we can make it available to them, by the way, the one that Columbia built, they'll have fun with it, right? You have a primary and secondary style that you can really, contribute with. You also have what I would consider to be some weaknesses, right? Some, I don't go here readily, right? So why try it, right? Look to other people in your group. So I always say, take the assessment, share the information, and find some balance. You cannot be all things to all people. But by the way, I expect, because of the development of the teams and where roles are effective, and I'm going to show you that, you've got to apply them. So if you're going to start, stall, accelerate, cruise, you need to apply all these. So the answer is yes, you got to do them all, but rely on the people on the team, not just yourself, to fulfill them. If you can do them all, that's great. Just know them and apply them as needed. So here it is. You ready? Forming, storming, norming, performing. So we got 31% forming, 20 storming, 32 norming, 22 performing. Use these roles. Use these roles. And ones that you feel are not your strength, let members of your team fill those roles for you. Good? Everybody got it? So I've talked about the development of a team. That's Tuckman. I've talked about the roles of a team. Okay? And now I'm going to keep, am I ran out of time already? No, not yet. Good. For that first part. So anyway, here's what we kind of broke down is, and we're going to leave this with you. If you know your primary role, here's what you're going to contribute. So ask yourself, is this me? Is this me? And if so, let people know it on the team. Look, you can have this discussion. Pull up this slide. We're going to send it to you. Pull it up and say, okay, we know these things are all going to be important. Who can do what? We'll give you an assessment as well. By the way, developed at Columbia Business School. You can use it. All right. But more importantly is not only what you can contribute, it's this one. What's your weakness? So in other words, if you have a least preferred role, make sure you have others that fulfill that. for you, okay, and know when to do it. All right, now, and I'll open this up as a question, because I think the person was getting to this in their question of me. If everyone takes their preferred role, do you have too much of one team process ingredient? Are you missing a key ingredient? What risks do you face as a team without that ingredient? In other words, have you ever found of any of these roles that wasn't present in the room, or strengths, think about it that way, and what's been the impact on you? Any questions around that or comments on that, Amanda, that you see out there?
We have had several questions come in. We have, let's see, going back here. There we go. What do you do with the team member that doesn't participate?
Oh, yeah. By the way, if someone is not participating in the team, then you got to ask the question, first of all, why aren't they participating? All right. Now, if you are the team charterer, or let's call it leader, I'm a firm believer, by the way, that every team at the end of every meeting, this isn't in my deck, but I'm going to give it to you. You probably know about it, should have an after action review. By the way, it only takes at the most 10 minutes. All right. 10 minutes. And there are 4 questions that you're going to ask. You've gotten through your first meeting. All right. First question is, okay, folks, what was our intent in this meeting? Let's just review the agenda, because that's what we were supposed to get done. That shouldn't take more than 30 seconds, right? Then the next question of the group is, so what happened? Well, somebody brings up the point. Let's try this one. Well, I think we had a good meeting, but I never heard from Bill. And Bill usually, in groups I've worked with him in, is pretty active. But Bill, you were silent. Then the third question is, let's assume that comes up. Third question is why? So what was their intent? What happened? And then the third question is why. So it's obvious for Bill to say at that point, well, folks, to be honest with you, I was lost. I mean, I just didn't quite understand why we were here or what we're trying to do. I mean, most of you seem to be on board, but you ready? I'll throw this one in for the fun of it. I came in late. I know you guys have met a couple times, and this is my first meeting, but to be honest with you, I was overwhelmed just by the fact that you had a lot more information than I did. Oh, okay. And then the fourth question comes in. So what can we do better? Well, a good charter or the group or chairperson would say, all right, let's try and get Bill up to speed as quick as we can. Amanda, we're going to let you mentor Bill between meetings. All right, talk to him, let him know what's going on. All right, remember we brought him in as an expert with regard to industry, and I know you're our customer person, and that's where we're trying to, I guess you might say, go with our new program. Meet with Bill and try and bring him up to speed. Bill, would that help you? Can't hurt, thanks. So an after action review at the end of each meeting can deal effectively with any dysfunction, including non-participation, as one example of that. I think teams, by the way, it's a matter of, as we say, there's no I in team, right? So you got to be aware of that fact that if you don't have participation, that's a good indicator that you've got a problem. The way to solve it is do that 10-minute debrief at the end of every meeting, asking the 4 questions. What was our intent? What happened? Why did it happen? What can we do better? Take it into your next meeting. If participation is one of the issues, it should be addressed then. And don't assume Bill is just a, lazy, no good. Amanda's got other things she could call him, but we'll leave it at that. Okay. Amanda, anything else there? That's another good question.
We do have a clarification question. When we use consensus, it refers to everyone being heard, not needing everyone to agree. Correct? In other words, we can disagree and commit.
Okay. Now, yes. Now, can I go on to that slide? Okay. Here it comes. By the way, whoever that person was, let them know that there are 2 things that I consider a good question is one that I know the answer to. I do know the answer to this question. You know why it's a great question? Because I have a slide for it. So you see, so whoever's out there, you are now asking a great question. Here's what I mean by consensus, all right? First of all, I think it's very important that we be clear as to what it is we're trying to make a decision on, right? And I think leaders have to do that. Here's my issue. Here's my problem. Here's what I'm trying to create, right? I call it the personal case if you're working with me, all right? Then I think it's also important you discuss the present state. Here's what's currently going on and the desired future state. Here's what I want to move to. So it's a from to discussion. All this is stage setting. Then it's important to drill down and ask yourself, well, what's the gap? In other words, if this is the present state and we want to go to here, from to, what's that gap of from to? What's causing it? Is it a question of the way we're structured? Is the question whether we do things, our process? Is it we got the wrong people? Or is it the way we do things, the culture issue, right? This is when debate begins around solutions. This is when the ideas start to flow, right? Once you get the root cause, then you start to say, okay, if we agree on those gaps, how do we close them? And you generate as many ideas as possible. Here's where consensus thrives, is when people contribute to what I call the solutions. You shouldn't shut that down. But at some point in time, you can't stay there indefinitely. What you got to do is make a decision. So here's what I recommend to you on consensus decision. Clearly state the problem. Drill it down to the point of, here's what we're trying to deal with. This is the gap. Generate ideas in the way to close the gap, and then say to this, look, we've generated a number of alternatives here, but I have a question. And the question is this: does anybody strongly object to any of the alternatives of choice that we've identified? All right? And if somebody raises their hand, there's always somebody in the room that says, yeah, I have a real problem with this one. Don't cut them off. What you do is say, okay, let's talk further about that. How could we change that to an acceptable alternative of choice? Have that discussion. Eventually then loop back. Granted, it takes more time. But by the way, so you know what I'm doing here. I'm trying to move you from compliance to commitment with regard to your team members. I don't want people just to go along. I want them to buy into it and be committed. So then what you do is you ask the question again. Okay, we've reformatted, framed, stated the alternative of choice. Now, does anybody strongly object to the alternatives of choice? If you look around the room, everybody says, no, we're okay with that, but I prefer, hold that thought. If no one strongly objects to the alternatives of choice, now let's take a straw vote. Put down your one or two favorite alternatives. Go ahead, write them down right now, one or two. All right, now I'm going to collect the straw vote. How many thought number one was a good idea? All right, then you get that group. Number two, number three. So this goes on to the point where you start to say, all right, the group appears to be tending towards, because remember, all alternatives of choice were acceptable, tending towards A, B, and C. Okay, so let's go forward. Now, what's the dynamic? The dynamic there is this. You didn't shut anybody down, right? You let them have their voice. You even let them have their challenge. And you rebuilt the alternative so no one strongly objective. So now when you get to a final choice, it will be acceptable to the group. So then you can go into planning your states. But consensus takes longer. Consensus, for the most part, invites dissent, invites debate, invites further contribution. But eventually you got to bring it to a close. That's when I say, check to see no one strongly objects to alternatives, do a straw vote, see where the tendency is going, and then work on those, because focus is key. That's good. That was good. Whoever's asking these questions, Amanda, put them down for an A. Put them down for an A. Okay. Anything else you got over there? See, that was a great question. I had a slide for it. All right.
Going back to the charts that you were showing before, someone had a question regarding the columns. It says you have a column of allowable weaknesses.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Does that imply that each team member has unallowable weaknesses?
Yeah, The unreliable weakness is the one that you try to do that you can't do well. That's the one that's unreliable. Uh, I don't mean to be, too trivial here, but the fact of the matter is, by the way, Aristotle had it right. By the way, this is Jesuit training coming, so be careful. All right, Aristotle had it right. What was Aristotle's statement? Know thyself. And I think the strength of all leaders and team members is understanding what it is that they can contribute well and what are the areas that they are limited in contributing to. And the answer is always go towards, right, the idea that you do well and have an open discussion and dialogue about that. And look to others to fulfill roles that you're not as good at. So an unallowable weakness is the one you're not good at, folks. As simple as that. But in knowing yourself. So, by the way, if I gave you a success formula, you'll like this one. So the first one is know yourself. You okay with that? And then it is to control yourself as the second part of my success. What are you controlling against? Doing those things you're not really, in many ways, let me say, not contributing to the team. Right? Don't take it in an area just to satisfy your need or your way of seeing the way things should be done. Back off of that and ask yourself the third question. Do I know others well of what they can provide? And then, of course, my fourth one is, well, let me try it on you. If it's a logical syllogism, know yourself, control yourself, know others, what do you think the fourth one is? What are we getting, Amanda? We getting anybody who wants to answer that? Know yourself, control yourself, know others. What's the fourth one? Anybody saying? Now, typically, some, really what I'd call arrogant, bright, typical MBA at Columbia, will say, yeah, it's control others. And I say, don't you wish? No, in teams, by the way, truly high effective teams, it's more of an egalitarian participatory, right, leadership that the group takes on. It's not hierarchical authoritarian. You don't want to control others. What you want to do is engage others, right? So what you do is you know yourself, control against always trying to do it your way or having people see the way you do, know others what their strengths are, and then fourth, apply those, do something for them to make the team work. In many cases, back to your original question, if it's an unallowable, in other words, if I do something poorly here, all I'm going to do is hurt the group more. Look to others to have it done. So there it is. That's a long answer to a good question. All right. So, Amanda, how are we doing? We okay? I can keep going. By the way, I'd love to, if you can, let me take you to this one. You've all seen this, but let me help you with it. And this gets to the consensus issue, and this gets into your leadership role. This is from Kilman's, Thomas and Kilman's conflict model. You probably know it, and we've all been there, is what can happen in terms of teams that are less than productive, right? Less than effective, less than efficient, is they can start to engage in these kinds of, how would I call it, ways of doing things. So there are certain teams, have anybody ever been in one of these where somebody tries to basically always have the group do it their way, right? If you had those leaders, they walk through the room, right? And they say, look, here, I told you what to do. What part of it don't you understand? Just do it, right? They're in many ways very competitive leaders. They're not good for teams, by the way. They're good for followers who want to, follow orders. They're command and control type leaders, and they're very competitive. So what we call that, the compete leaders, are kind of a win-lose. They win and you lose. To be able to work with those kind of leaders, you see a lot of people who concede. What they do, by the way, is go along and they call it lose-win, right? In other words, yeah, okay, it's going to be all about you. It's not going to be about me, right? This is one, by the way, we've seen in teams that aren't functioning effectively. They opt out. They just, guys, do whatever you want. I don't care. That's the avoidance. A lot of times in teams, they think if this is happening, it's good. By the way, we do build our government around this concept in Congress, that compromise is what we should seek. In other words, we shouldn't compete. That's win-lose. We shouldn't concede. That's lose-win. We shouldn't avoid. That's lose-lose. We should compromise. And that's sometimes called many win, many lose. In other words, We take a little bit from here, a little from there. But where I'm trying to take you in terms of your teams is this one. This is collaboration. This is consensus decision making. What you want to get to a point is, and I know it can be a fight, right? It can be a tough battle, but you want to get to the point where all ideas are accepted, debated, deliberated upon, and then reach the consensus within the group of which way you want to go. That's what collaboration gives you. By the way, that's win-win. That's win-win. And teams that are high performing, that are effective, that in many ways use their time to the best advantage are collaborating. They're not competing, they're not conceding, they're not compromising or avoiding a problem. They're collaborating in that decision. Anybody want to push back on that out there? What do you think? By the way, if we had more poll questions, I'd ask you, how do you think your team's doing on this one, folks? Tell me, right? Collaboration takes time. I've seen many groups that start out to collaborate, and they default. They default to a strong leader who's saying, now look, I've heard enough. We're going to do it this way. That's the compete model. Or better yet, well, I've heard everybody's. Here's what I think is the middle road. The compromise is not necessarily the best decision. Can feed and avoid you. Right? Anything out there, Amanda?
Yeah, we had one that just came in. What if you're coaching a team? At some point, doesn't the coach have to say, this is the way our team works?
Yeah, of course, the way I would say I'd like you to say it's going to work is this, that look, we're going to get the best decisions from the people in the room is if we respect one another, right? We have certain ground rules. It's the way we're going to best work together, but the end result will be we're going to collaborate and construct the best solutions to solving our issues or create new things with regard to the challenges we face. That's the language I'd like to have out there by a leader, right? Set those ground rules. By the way, I should give you a little bit more. I don't think you should take anything for granted with regards to ground rules. And so here's another tool for you. Ready? It's not in the deck, but take a note on this. If you're going to start, this is the forming stage. Remember I told you it's good to know who you have in the room? Try this one. You should also say, look, we've all, come from various parts of the organization, and we're all trying to solve a unique problem or, develop a new thing here. Let's just, first of all, answer this question. Take an individual note here. Think about the best team you were ever on and write down the one or maybe two things that you think made it the best. Write those things down. All right? Okay, everybody done that? Okay, now, I want you to think of the team from hell you were on. Yeah, the worst team you were on. And write down the one thing you made it that way, okay? Now what I'd like to do is let's have a discussion. So I'd go around and say, okay, Amanda, tell me about your best team. What were the two things that made it? Well, when they had a clear charter and when everybody's ideas were welcomed. I'd say, great. I say, anybody else have that on their list? And say, yeah, I had that one on. Okay, now, those of you that have got those two things checked off your list, what else you got? And you build what is basically what I call the rules of the road for how you're going to agree. See, because eventually what's going to happen is you're going to get maybe a half dozen, what I call guiding principles for the way the team will interact. Now you might say, well, Bill, what about the bad team? If you look at the things that made for success, they're usually, when flipped and not present, is what you end up with in the bad team. So I always say to leaders, you're starting up a new team, and by the way, even if it's an existing team, find an excuse. Find an excuse to have that exercise occur. Maybe a new member coming in. Saying, look, Bill's a new guy coming in. Let's just kind of ask Bill, we haven't done this in here yet, but we thought we'd try it. Let's just take a moment out and ask ourselves, of the best teams you're ever on, what made it a good team for you? And the worst, what made it bad for you? And then we'll have a discussion in the group. Then what you do is you populate these kind of ideas. And I always say, if you can't, post them in the room that you're going to meet in, or send them out as a guide with your agenda for the meeting. So if I had to ramp it up, I'd call it maybe a social contract, but I call it rules for the road for teams. So there's another tool. All right. So what tools have you got so far? Roles, right? Consensus decision making. What it makes for good teams, rules of the road. Okay. All right. So, Amanda, you got anything else? I'm having fun with this. Okay. So, consensus decision making. By the way, I'll just remember I wanted to talk about development. That's the norming, forming, storming. All right. Norming, storming, forming, performing. Then I want to talk about roles. There are 8, and they rely to those stage you're at. If you're forming, you want to have a good conductor. You want to have a good consensus seeker, right? You want to have a good resource seeker, right? If you're into what we would call the storming stage, you want to have an idea generator and a checker. If you're in, okay, let's go the point of norming, the implementer. Everybody get on board, do something. And ultimately, by the way, if you're in peak performance, realize that you're in a change role now, and you should always have somebody monitoring your continued progress, arbiter. Okay, you've done that. All right, now in the consensus, just understand that group decision-making processes with groups that develop and agree to support a decision in the best interest of the whole. So what I'm looking for here is not compliance, but commitment. So that's why I'm trying to take you to consensus, all right? And of course, it requires deliberation and finalizing. Everybody agree with the alternatives of choice? Let's do a straw poll. Let's see where we're at. Let's make some choices then and go forward. Process leadership is important if we're going to do this. Absolutely. Understand that, by the way, if you get into a command and control role, all you're going to be is on task. If you're going to be a more, what I would call, effective team leader, you need to be equally on process. Here's some research that might surprise you. How many of you all are on a team, right? Trying to get something done. Here's some research. And by the way, what should be the size of a team? We can debate this, but research shows about 7, right? But in this case, the research looked at 222 project teams, ranging in size from 3 to 8 people. And the teams, by the way, that employed more of the things we've been talking about here outperformed 97% of the time the other groups did. So more and more we're finding that this is supported by the research efforts. So I'm asking you to be more egalitarian and participatory as a leader, not command and control. All right. I want you to seek consensus seeking in your groups, right? And to be tolerant of that process that it takes. I gave you all that, so we won't go through it. Use your team roles. Here's my takeaways, and then we'll open up for final questions. Use your team roles, collaborate in win-win decisions, use consensus decision making, and be more of an egalitarian, participatory leader. All right. Having said that, I'm going to go to Amanda and ask, do we have questions?
Okay, we have a few and time for a couple of them probably. How do you maneuver someone to a role that needs to be filled?
Yeah. I love the word maneuver, right? First of all, I always give choice. I find that choice is a very powerful element in getting people to buy in to greater responsibilities. So the way I would start it is this. And again, let's say we're talking to Bill again, all right? And say, Bill, we've talked a lot about these various roles and when they need to be employed in our group. And I know you've done some self-assessment of this, as we all have. At this point in time, we really do need somebody with some strong analytical skills to join us with regard to vetting, let's say, our ideas. And as I recall, that was an area that you scored pretty high in. Can we talk about how you can fulfill a greater role in that in our group? Let's just have a discussion. So I always tell people to do it 2 ways. One is make it not a demand, but a request. 2, base it on the fact that the person doesn't feel like it's out of their range of capability. And then ultimately give them the why. Give them the strong why, right? If you give them a strong, by the way, the why is the charter, what you're trying to do. If you give anybody a strong enough why, you usually can ask them to do any what. So if you want to bring somebody on board, again, I would make it a request. I would do it fact-based, based on an assessment of what you think their contribution can do, and then tell them why it's important. those are usually the guiding principles I think any leader with members can use.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. What advice can you offer new managers, particularly in regards to developing relationships in order to become an effective leader?
Oh, that's a good question. Right. Well, it's interesting is that when I first came to Columbia, I taught a course that was called Managing Interpersonal and Group Dynamics. Now, today, by the way, we would call it emotional intelligence and social intelligence. I mean, that would be the new phrase. Goldman, by the way, is the science writer originally from the New York Times, and then he's a secondary researcher, pulled a lot of good stuff together. Some of you've read his stuff, right? Emotional intelligence. Then he went on to emotional intelligence in the workplace. Then he went on to primal leadership. Last book was on social. What's the difference between emotional intelligence and social intelligence? Well, emotional intelligence is about me. Social intelligence is about us. Now, your question was, how do you take a new manager to the point, and in many ways kind of develop them, is what I was hearing, to more effectiveness. I'm a firm believer, by the way, and I'll kind of end with this, is give them a good kind of insight in terms of not just their expertise, functional expertise, but the expertise needed to lead others. To lead others, you need to have emotional and social intelligence. And we don't have a lot of time to go into it here, but what I would do is whenever I was, and this is the way I would assume you would want to, is coach them on both dynamics. Look, I'm watching you do your work. It's first quality. We are just impressed with the way you've taken on these tasks and completed them. But let's talk about the way we're doing it. And the way we're doing it gets into the social and emotional intelligence area, and spend some time identifying that. Now, I can get into, if you want, some particulars with regard to that. But by the way, I'm a firm believer. Remember my formula? Know yourself is basically the first part of emotional intelligence. Control yourself, that's the second part of emotional intelligence. Know others is the first part of social intelligence. And then doing something for others, remember my formula, is the other part of social intelligence. So it's all right there. You just need to peel it back for people that you're trying to develop as leaders. And that's what I do in my executive leadership class. We deal with both areas. You're good?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Klepper. And just to remind everyone, I will be sending out an email early next week that will have the link to the recording as well as the slides to this webinar, so you can go back through there. And there will also be a very brief survey in that email, so please feel free to fill that out and give us some feedback on this webinar and just the webinar program in general as we move forward. Also, to find out more ways to stay connected and engaged with our other alumni benefits, please visit slu.edu/alumni. And also, just to reiterate, Bill is a member of the National Alumni Board. You can find information on that out there as well if you're interested. And Bill, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would. I have an ask of all of you. Here it comes. All right. As you know, we, as fellow alumni, we're celebrating with the university its 200th birthday. Yeah, it's our bicentennial year. And by the way, this was let's call it a gift, right? For me, it's paying it forward, right? But here's what I'd like you to do. When you get the materials, I've asked Amanda to put in a little link. The little link says, yes, I would like to contribute to the bicentennial fund. And it can be whatever amount you can. But if you felt there was any value, right, for you in this session, my gift to you, pay it forward. Pay it forward by giving your gift to our university, our alma mater, in its 200th year. Because what we really want to do is continue to seek the higher purpose and the greater good. So thank you all very much, and let's go forward.
Yes, sounds good. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.